The Legend of Korra, Ruins of the Empire. It starts out months ago in Earth Empire re-education camp and has a really boring start to it with none of the main characters in it. Someone in power gets told that the tyrant Kuvira surrendered to Korra and ordered every Earth soldier to do the same. He refuses to surrender, and it goes to the present day where Bolin tells Zhu Li a bunch of appointments she has. He's thanked, and Varric wants a date with her, but realistically she doesn't have time for it. King Wu of the Earth Kingdom gets welcomed to the city and thanks Zhu Li and is relatively nervous about public speaking. Eventually makes a speech about his plan to abolish the monarchy, and we get to see that someone from the show isn't happy about it. He announces when the first election will be, and he gets nervous from all of the questions, and he ends up singing. He throws a hat so the grandma gets to catch it, and I like seeing Mako with his hands over his eyes saying that he didn't want him to start singing. Zhu Li says once the other states see this one's smooth transition to democracy, they'll follow suit. Then eventually the story shows us Kuvira's trial, which is supposed to be cathartic for the audience to make up for the boring overload of dialogue with nothing happening. She's asked how she pleads and apologizes for the harm she caused, but it doesn't matter because she still digs herself deeper by saying they're ignoring her achievements. It sure is convenient that the judge tells her to list them instead of just insulting her and moving on with the trial. She points out that she brought back order to the kingdom when it fell into chaos, modernized the kingdom, and did everything she could for the good of the kingdom. I see why she thinks she did the right thing, but she had no excuse for staying in power after she brought order and expanding the empire. She pleads not guilty for some reason, and it's lampshaded that the world knows what she did. So it is stupid, because she is guilty of those charges. She says that her adoptive family turned their backs on her. I find it cathartic when she reminds her that she's apologized plenty of times and wants her to forgive her already, considering that she was completely cold to her after she apologized at the end of the show. She's told that she needs to take responsibility for what she did first. How did apologizing not count as that? I have to wonder why the story wants us to sympathize with the main villain of the show's last season. It shouldn't be writing her to want her forgiveness because it makes it harder on the audience. Eventually Bolin tells his friends to help themselves to food in Zhu Li's office, and Mako asks him how the new job is going. I already know that Bolin keeps changing jobs. Eventually Zhu Li thanks everyone for showing up. She said she'll let Wu explain, and he thanks her and says he'd like the Avatar team to accompany him. For some reason Mako thinks it'd be beneath them to protect him when they've got nothing to do, but just because it's him, he has a problem. And he eventually explains his kingdom's being threatened by its own army. There's some reports about an army in this province that never surrendered, so eventually Korra worries that the commander with an annoying name could try to stop people from voting and give the other states an excuse to call off the elections, which are being done to keep the Earth Empire from rising to power again, even though nothing would stop a democratically elected leader from leading conquests. Bolin asks to go with Team Avatar because he's bored with his menial jobs. Korra wants to find out what Kuvira knows about the commander. Asami doesn't want to be in the same room as Kuvira because she took her father from her, so she doesn't want to be reminded of her again. Korra's fine with it and is thanked and wished good luck and kissed in the cheek. Kuvira remembers being a completely unsympathetic brat who broke a vase for no reason and was locked in her room as discipline, only to earthbend and run away. Korra tells Kuvira that her commander didn't surrender and she's sincerely shocked about it. She eventually says she'd deal with him by taking someone with her that he respects, who could reason with him and bring him in line, which is of course her, and Korra can't agree to that right away. So eventually, there's a boring speech and the Earth Kingdom tanks get on the move because of the commander. It's interesting that the heroes have a meeting in a steam room. Zhu Li doesn't want to incite another war by sending her army out. Korra waterbends, saying that she wants them to relax before she tells them what she's thinking. Eventually, she explains Kuvira's idea and gets predictable complaints about it for a while. They shouldn't be saying no though, because it's either this idea or a bunch of people get hurt in a war. Korra says Kuvira helped them before, and her nearly dying was a wake-up call, and she could somehow tell that she was still broken when she visited her. She wasn't acting evil, but she wasn't acting nice either. Bolin's surprisingly the first one to side with Korra on this for a pragmatic reason. It still seems like it's got no chance of working, because why would a commander who's starting a conquest agree to give up because of someone he has no respect for anymore talking to him? But it's still believable because most of these people have powers and would outnumber Kuvira if she tried anything, so it wouldn't really backfire on them if she did. And I can't blame them for wanting to try anything other than inciting a war. Why did Korra call Kuvira the prisoner instead of by name? She actually complains about that like she took offense and says they're partners now. So it humanizes her that she's sensitive like that. Why does Korra have to say they're not teammates? If she's helping her, she's a teammate. She tells Kuvira something she should already know, and she genuinely smiles and says she's in charge. She gets shown a metal cage they could potentially put her in and tells them that if she was the type to try anything, she'd have already done it. And Korra reassures her friends to make them agree to not humiliate her unnecessarily. I'm impressed by how calmly Kuvira is dealing with such a tense situation. 3 days later, the heroes still haven't seen the commander's army, and Kuvira wishes she had some more presentable clothes. I guess she's been complaining about this for days, because it wouldn't make any sense for her to just now start complaining about it. Mako hates her too much to say yes, and Korra is smart enough to say that the commander might refuse to meet with them if Kuvira looks like a prisoner. So Asami offers her some clothes to borrow. Korra gets shown 2 unlikable looking candidates who never show a personality, who are already government officials. And Korra doesn't know how the voters would ever be able to decide. Will wanted candidates that were younger. He didn't want to keep the outdated bureaucracy alive, and doesn't see the point of having a vote if the state's going to be governed the same as it's always been. He's young, but he also wants to run away from his responsibility by stepping down as king. He doesn't even like public speaking, so that makes sense. Finally, Korra sees some tanks, and Kuvira wastes some time trying to get Asami to open up to her about the fact that just because she's Korra's friend, she's stuck guarding her when she could be doing what she wants. This is the only memorable part of the arc for me. I don't remember anything else about it. Asami says she's not going to drive a wedge between her and Korra, and she says she's not trying to, and she's actually impressed by the loyalty people have to her, since she doesn't have that anymore. Bolin calls her out on refusing to be friends with Opal for no reason, and Asami says no one changes overnight, even though it hasn't just been one night. And everyone should know that going through a bad enough experience could make anyone get traumatized into changing. This is more misplaced sympathy, like with Eclipse or Surge. Why make the audience miserable by making the villain too sympathetic if she'll only get put through misery by the writer? Eventually Kuvira talks to him in a completely predictable, calm way. Somehow she doesn't even try to tell them why their great experiment should end. Why didn't she tell them the consequences of not giving up right away? The only point in her saying this is that it makes her look better to Korra. Of course a war commander won't care about getting people killed. She warns him that his force is a fraction of what the Earth Empire once was, so he has no real power. She tells the soldiers to surrender and they'll all be dealt with fairly. Who would want to be dealt with? Of course they refuse to surrender. She challenges them to a fight and says he'll surrender if he loses. Why would he honor his word? She's just trying anything she can. He refuses to fight and calls her the coward despite the fact that he's refusing a fight, and she challenged him to one. She earthbends trying to start the fight and metalbends him to have him by the collar. Kuvira could end the whole arc right here. But instead she's shocked because of a remote trigger on her belt. All these heroes look like drooling idiots, because they're completely opposed to what she did. Mako has no reason to think bringing her was a bad idea because she almost solved their problem in the only way they would avoid war. It's either one guy gets defeated, or a huge amount of people do. Compare that to Aang's team avatar, who were peer pressuring them into killing Ozai. Eventually, out of nowhere, the commander says he wasn't here to stop the election, and instead he's going to run for governor, which he could have said he was going to do a lot earlier to avoid Kuvira being humiliated. He had no reason not to say that instantly. And he's allowed to do this even though Wu thinks of him as breaking the law. You'd think criminals wouldn't be allowed to do this because felons can't even vote. But I just remembered this is realistic. But he's literally a wanted criminal, not even someone with a record. And then Kuvira gets told she was being stupid by provoking an army. Mako thinks they should call off the vote, and Wu doesn't want to discourage democracy just because he doesn't like one of the candidates, even though Korra knows he'll win. Kuvira says they have to find a candidate to run against him who's popular enough to win. Wu wonders who they could pick instead of volunteering. Korra desperately picks Toph, despite the fact that she knows her personally. Bolin's smarter than her because he knows she's not interested in world affairs. That's why it's instantly obvious this plan will fail. Toph may be in favor of doing the right thing if you have to do it to avoid something worse, but she's also selfish and harsh. The roles should have been reversed here. The story has some creepy, boring dialogue between the villains, and predictably confirms that she's conveniently brainwashing people into wanting to vote for the commander. How is there so much sci-fi technology in the 20s? This isn't the kind of technology that bending would cause to come about faster. But at least technology makes more sense to do this than whatever the Dai Li did. The heroes plan on bringing Kuvira to the adoptive mother that stopped caring about her because they wouldn't have time to fly Kuvira back to her old prison. They hug and kiss, and eventually Wu sprays himself in the eyes with bug spray by accident. I mention it because at least it's interesting. And Korra rides away with Wu on Animal. Eventually Asami finds out the engines won't start, and Kuvira figures out why, and the windows get broken by the soldiers. Why don't I get to see the impact when Bolin hits a soldier with a chair? Why is Asami refusing to let Kuvira out when she needs protection? She's outnumbered in a fight, and she's not the bender here. And in a fighting situation, it's obvious that letting out someone harsh wouldn't backfire. Asami and her friends get tied up really easily. Somehow Asami thinks all this was Kuvira's idea when she should recognize that these are the commander's soldiers. Nothing interesting is happening in Korra's trip through the swamp. I wish it just started at the part where she's in front of a plant she can tap into to connect to Toph. Wu wants to go to the bathroom and eventually runs away and sees a hallucination of the evil former ruler before him, who insists that nobody wants progress because she's only voicing his own fears as a result of the spirit magic of the swamp, I guess. Otherwise, this is even more arbitrary than Surge's hallucination. It is lampshaded what his real motive is, and he refuses to admit it anyways. The commander wants Kuvira to join him again and threatens to brainwash Asami and her friends otherwise. Surprisingly, she wants them released, despite them treating her like garbage. Kuvira's confused by this, so she didn't know about the brainwashing, which predictably was inspired by the Dai Li. Thankfully, the mad scientist explains that the victims of the Dai Li tended to revert to normal more often than not. Good! That kinda confirms that Judy returns to normal. This is a better talent than IDW Sonic has. She says magnetic waves can totally brainwash people permanently, and Kuvira's against this. This would have had more tension if all the people involved didn't have plot armor. Eventually Wu gets startled by seeing Toph's face in the dirty wall, and she says she's not a fan of monarchy. He doesn't hold it against her. And the predictable boredom ends when Kuvira is set free and fights back and escapes successfully. Predictably, Toph says no and thinks anyone who falls into government comes out of it filthy. What about Tenzin? I guess she's exaggerating. Why does Korra think a mean person is incorruptible? She's scammed people with a shell game before. Though I don't know if Korra knows that. She also said she hates people, so she doesn't want to be in service to them. Let's just ignore the fact that she was a hero for fun, and a police chief, which was by definition being in service to people. She didn't really phrase it well. She's always hated people, and that didn't stop her before. It's in character for her to not want to do boring paperwork because she's more about fighting and other thrills. She only stopped because of her back. But somehow she doesn't simply explain that she'd be bored by a desk job and already hated paperwork as a chief of police. Korra gets the idea to whisper in front of her to get her curiosity and mention that she told Wu to ignore what the swamp said to him, when she knows Toph thinks the swamp knows what's best. That explains why it gave Aang a vision of Toph, so it's not just about scaring people. Wu says it was told by the swamp that the people don't want change and would rather feel safe than do anything unfamiliar. Somehow this encourages Toph to run for governor, instead of causing Toph to say that Wu should run for governor. Something should have been written to explain to her that Wu's unpopular for being a wuss. The story wastes my time with a flashback of Kuvira being called a brat by her parents and brought to a master metalbender to be raised by her better, because it just assumed that metalbenders are strict parents for no reason. And we see her take her hand. Kuvira radios Sue and tells her everything, and she's reluctant to believe her about brainwashing despite the Dai Li existing. She says she doesn't know who else to turn to, and eventually Toph signs up. So many panels are in these comics that should have been cut out. Eventually Korra sees someone in a vehicle tell her to follow her, and it's Kuvira in disguise who reveals her disguise to her. And somehow she didn't instantly recognize her voice. Why didn't she explain things to her right away? Instead, Korra threatens her with fire, going back to the hothead she's most famous for being, although it's justified. Once again, the story frustrates me by making me sympathize with someone I don't want to. I believe her remorse, because the reactions in the issue would only be written if the writer thought she was remorseful. But why is she the most sympathetic character in the arc? Eventually Toph confirms that she's telling the truth. It's too bad she didn't confirm the truth as soon as Korra accused her of lying. Toph says she knew there was something fishy about people mindlessly repeating the same slogan, and it reminds her of the Dai Li. She could have said this earlier though. The story bores me until the commander gets a call about Kuvira meeting up with Korra, and Wu says this is all his fault and regrets asking them to come with them. If he's referring to Toph, it was obviously a good idea because Toph said that Kuvira wasn't lying, and Kuvira tells him it's pointless to blame himself. Wu acts like calling off the election is an idea he came up with, and not just him recycling Mako's idea. Yeah, that totally won't cause a revolt. Kuvira warns him that once the commander realizes what Wu is up to, none of them would get out of the state without being brainwashed. So she says they should regroup in Zaofu, where Opal's mother gets whined at some more and eventually reunites with her. This is like how Penders tried creating sympathy for Thayer after he was made unlikable by having everyone hate him for dumb reasons. Nothing happens until Korra says she's not leaving without her friends. Kuvira says she'll help her, and she actually thanks her. And Sue says they'll help too. Oh great, Korra's doing the "you can fight this" cliche. Kuvira says it's pointless right away, and hopefully this is the end of that because it'd be hacky writing to have her like this for the entire fight. How convenient that Korra's friends are just slowly walking to them, letting them plan against them when they were only ordered to go fight them. They just instantly start the fight. Why didn't Korra make this plan earlier when it was safe? Opal airbands the three into each other and ropes get shot around them, and somehow they snap off. Eventually, Kuvira, Sue, and Toph earthbend the soldiers upwards, and somehow Opal doesn't send a wall of air that couldn't be avoided to knock over Bolin. So she's hit with a rock after being made to fight like a dumbass. What made her think she was doing a good job? Someone approaches Wu, who says that the commander got to him too, and he gets scared by him. Asami gets dodged, and her hand's close enough to the ground that it can be trapped in earth. And Toph and her family are hiding behind a wall that they somehow don't just send at the people using fire against them. Korra comes to the rescue with airbending, and Korra gets told to settle for just getting Asami back, and they leave the king behind. The story torments Korra with Asami a little more than necessary, but it would feel empty if she said nothing. Sue thankfully refuses to have Kuvira restrained, who says she could reverse engineer the brainwashing tech to reverse it, but would need her ex-boyfriend's help. And Kuvira's reluctant to face Batar again, so eventually we get to see her apologize to him. And he says he wouldn't have tried to kill her. He says she hasn't changed even though she said she felt terrible. So after that forced drama, Korra tells him that the future of his kingdom depends on him. And eventually Wu says the election's gonna take place today and the voters are already here. It takes advantage of him being brainwashed because it shows him be mad for once. Opal's venting doesn't have any consequence, thankfully, and Sue says that she and her family can't be seen as aggressors against democracy. And Opal complains and is told to stop bickering. Toph says she forfeited when she left the state, and I get reminded of the heroes' plan, and it gets boring again. Why does Korra even bother trying to hold Asami's hand here? The story has a vague time skip to when the anti-brainwashing machine is done, and Kuvira is praised by her ex on her excellent memory. The hard part is figuring out the electricity settings used to alter Asami. Why don't they know it already? The story keeps having them fail. But I understand that the writer thought it'd feel anticlimactic if it worked instantly. Kuvira wonders if the solution is starting with someone who wasn't brainwashed yet, because it gives them a proper baseline to calibrate the settings from there. Why would there be a risk? Why did it take a million different settings for someone to think of this? Somehow they're worried that the machine could give Korra memory loss. This gives Kuvira the excuse to help redeem herself by volunteering. And Sue says she doesn't have to do this. And Bataru finally says she changed because she said this is her mess. He'd only know for sure if she was back in her old position. But that won't happen, so there's really no harm in being nice to her. It's not like the heroes are giving a second chance to a walking plot device who only exists to try to kill the heroes. She remembers telling Opal to get out of her own bedroom because it's her turn with the dollhouse, and she responds to not getting her way by breaking it. And she's asked why she did it because she's the king of stupid questions, and somehow she says she doesn't know why she did it. Sue isn't interested in punishing her out of pity, and Opal refuses to call her sister and says nobody wanted her, even though her parents might have before she drove them away herself. So Sue is completely unsympathetic here, by being completely inconsiderate to her family. Also, Kuvira was told to clear her mind. Apparently he was wrong about that being necessary, because her mind isn't clear and there's no consequences to it. Eventually, Asami gets brought back to normal, and conveniently she can't access the memories she would have been creating when she was brainwashed. Korra hugs her, reassuring her, and eventually they're told the commander stole the election. Zule is given exposition by Korra, and eventually she says she doesn't want Korra doing anything because if word gets out that Wu is brainwashed, that could cause chaos. She plans to speak with Sue and other world leaders and wants Kuvira back in her old prison because she's a hindrance now, somehow. None of the world leaders are okay with going to war, so there's no reason this would do anything. Bataru gets his thrown back in his face how he was rude to her, and he calmly tells her to have a safe trip back. Kuvira puts her hand on him reassuringly and says that she broke her own heart betraying him, and insists that she loved him too. He says it was nice working with her again, and Asami asks Korra if she did or said anything she might have regretted, instead of staying quiet, which proves that somehow she did forget, that the unbrainwashing conveniently had the side effect of memory loss. It's so convenient that magnetic waves destroy neurons. Korra forgives and hugs her. They hold hands, and eventually Sue says she found the guards unconscious outside Kuvira's door because she escaped. I can't blame her for not wanting to go back to a solitary confinement cell. Again, the only reason she was a villain was because she was in a position of tyrant, so without that, she's harmless. It's not like she's a thief, and her flashbacks at least had a point in establishing that she changed because she used to have no control over her anger, and now she can put up with anything. So the only worry is about bad writing coming up. She's not an IDW Sonic villain is what I'm saying. That's why I'm not mad at Korra for having faith in her and telling Asami what she owes her. Why didn't she tell her this earlier? Korra says that because she was mad at the commander earlier, she thinks she's heading for him in that stolen plane. I would have gone somewhere that wasn't the most predictable place ever so I could actually hide. Eventually the mayor is escorted out of the room even though he's right that he could be his assistant. I wish he got to explain what he plans to do for him, because just saying that isn't a good argument. The commander says he'd ask how Kuvira snuck in, but that'd insult her cunningness. I just wish I got that plot hole filled in, because all it looks like is that she effortlessly walked her way here with no resistance. Out of all the different times the comics wasted our time instead of not showing us stuff, or showed us stuff that was plot progression but didn't actually need to be in the comic, why doesn't it show us how she got here too? She says that she'll never get things back to the way they used to be for herself, so the only path left for her is to follow his. It makes sense, or he's just being manipulated. Eventually, after he makes a long rant that he doesn't want to give her old position back, She says she has no interest in that, and all she wants is to forget her regret-filled memories. To make things make more sense for him, she says she always knew he wouldn't let her back with him without brainwashing anyways. This really is the best deal for her, because it's either this or she lives the rest of her life as a hiding hermit who could be caught up with by the cops any day while she's alone with her thoughts. The heroes take a ride on Air Bison, and Opal's mother gives Kuvira the benefit of the doubt. Eventually, Kuvira is put in the brainwashing machine and she metal bends to put the helmets on the bad guys instead. How inconvenient that they were apparently too cheap to make pure platinum helmets. So she wouldn't be able to do this. It would be smart of her to make herself forget after this is done. But if she had a real brain, she'd immediately brainwash them instead of buying them time with a monologue. She says she's gonna make him tell the whole world that he stole the election and surrender. So she doesn't have ill intentions here, I guess, based on just what she's saying. It's so frustrating that she only has to avoid fire and the bad guys only get to take the helmets off because she didn't just press the buttons right away. At least it was smart of the villains to have backup just in case. So she has to run away. Korra airbends to restrain her old friends, and Toph and her family start fighting the bad guys. Yeah, Toph is still a wasted character here if she's literally only doing stuff that other people on the same team as her are also doing, so you could remove her from the plot with no difference. And I get to see Asami shock the person who brainwashed her with the impact shown, rather than her never getting to land a single hit on the person who brainwashed her because of lame writing. She shocked her in the chest. How does she not have a heart attack from this? Maybe she did. Kuvira's bending ruins the commander's escape in a vehicle. Eventually she gets hurt. She slices a vehicle apart and has him pinned to a wall with metal. He says he surrenders, and sadly the writer makes her threaten to kill him in front of Sue to turn her against her. Sue says that killing him won't solve anything or bring her peace. She agrees with her and conveniently drops her weapon. And again, it's ambiguous here. Either she actually agrees with her, or she's just completely desperate to get Sue like her again. It makes the writing of Season 4 better, because the fact that she's actually useful here establishes that it was actually a good thing that Korra didn't kill her. After she had told the commander to start his army idea, at that point it would have been too late, and it would have actually completely screwed them over if Korra killed her in Season 4. Korra's friends get brought back to normal and hugged, and the civilians get returned to normal too. Just like when they were first brainwashed, the story just conveniently skips over showing how they were brought to these machines. I guess metal-bending cops and airbending didn't. The mayor gets told that it's Kuvira who saved the day. Eventually, Will makes a speech to people saying that each state's gonna come up with its own timetable for elections according to the wishes of the citizens, because otherwise he'd be forcing his will on the people. He says that trying to create democracy too fast was being unrealistic. Reminds me of Numa with Metropolis. We never saw the rest of the Acorn Kingdom reacting to its monarchy getting weakened, or Ixis being elected. He keeps boring me until the people cheer for him. And Toph says she prefers the swamp because there the predators are honest with her. So that's relatable. Eventually we see another trial that has Varric give testimony against Kuvira based on what she did in the show. I thought she already had a trial. There's no reason they would have left anything out. Why is this being done again? I guess all of this caused Sue to appeal her original trial, and she could just do that whenever she wants because she's a leader. Kuvira confesses and admits that she was wrong about thinking she knew what was best for everyone, and that she didn't concern herself with consequences in her quest for power. She hopes she'll be able to heal some of the pain she caused by pleading guilty. Eventually, Bolin says that after everything he's been through, he's fine with the boring office job for a while. He doesn't remember being brainwashed though. He didn't really go through anything traumatizing, like Mako breaking an arm. Korra praises Kuvira, and so do Mako and Bolin, and Asami does too. Kuvira says she's glad she helped him out, and Sue finally says she owes her an apology. She thinks that if she had been a better mother, she could have guided her on a better path. Yeah, what she needed to apologize for was being heartless to her recently. But she did fail her parents by not disciplining her when that's the whole reason she was brought to her in the first place. And if only they had known that, none of Season 4 would have happened. She needs to apologize to Kuvira's parents. Because it wasn't just Sue's fault, it was also the people who put Kuvira in charge in the first place. Kuvira shows gratitude to her, gets hugged, as I wish I found the scene to be memorable considering how depressing the ending of the show was, not to mention the whole arc. She says that because of her remorse and her help stopping the commander, she gets to be released into her custody. She'll be under house arrest like her ex, who also isn't actually dangerous, because there's no reason he would ever get back in his old position, and that's the only position where he was ever a villain. And Opal says that she and her family all came around to the idea of her coming home. I wish she didn't say that her family thought she was crazy, because I think based on what she did, they should have already come around. I'm so relieved she won't have to be in solitary confinement anymore. Seriously, that was messed up. Snively was being put through that by Eggman, that's how bad that is. And I did an entire rant in the description of that issue explaining all of the side effects of solitary confinement. So the only reason she wasn't showing those side effects in this arc was that she was tough enough to completely hide them. The story ends with her being shown affection by Sue again. This arc by Michael DiMartino and Brian Kay was about Korra dealing with a wannabe tyrant who brainwashed her friends like the Dai Li all over again. So no wonder I forgot everything about the plot of this. It's just like what Jet went through, only applied to the main characters, but with better technology than the 1920s should allow for. And the tyrant thing is just Ozai again, obviously. There's an election in the background, but nothing is done with the fact that the commander won the election, so no wonder I forgot. The only memorable part of the arc was Asami being cold to Kuvira while she was portrayed as sympathetic. As much as it's a risk to give a happy ending to one of the main villains, it's great that the story did it and redeemed her because she's not a villain unless she's in a position of tyrant. She earned her happy ending by tricking the commander and ruining his attempt at escaping the heroes. So the arc was written alright, with the only thing hurting the experience being the typical unavoidable problem of a padded out arc. I was constantly annoyed by the needlessly slow pacing and how it keeps grinding to a halt to have too much boring dialogue. When these aren't larger than life characters, they're all calm people most of the time. So most of the time you could take the dialogue of any particular character and put it in a different character's mouth and you wouldn't be able to notice a difference. Bolin and Varric are supposed to be the entertaining ones, but they barely got to shine. I also hated that the so-called heroes were wasting time lashing out at someone verbally when they should know better. They're not dealing with someone who's only motivated by the desire to kill the main characters, or a thief. So it's annoying seeing them selfishly treat her like garbage for mistakes they know she'll never be able to make again. It's not fun to see all the main characters you're supposed to like be annoying, and the main villain of the past be pitiful. And that's enough to make you not want to go back to a story because all that's memorable about it is the depressing tone, with just one happy scene for her.